Okay, good morning. I'm going to be speaking about debunking the flat earth. Yeah, there really is a movement out there of flat earthers, believe it or not. And people may ask, well, Danny, why are you so concerned about this? Well, for many years, people would equate belief in recent creation, biblical creation, with believing the earth is flat. And as long as that was hyperbole, I was okay with that. But now it's not hyperbole. About 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, this movement started up. And I think it's a real threat to my ministry and my calling. That's the reason why I've taken it on. Also, I happen to believe I'm uniquely qualified to handle this whole idea. And you may say, well, this whole question of the Earth's shape, being flat or being a globe, didn't we settle this 5 centuries ago with Christopher Columbus? Well, the answer is no, we didn't. Actually, in the West, we settled this 25 centuries ago. At the time of Christopher Columbus, people in the West knew the world was a globe and had known it for 2,000 years. Unfortunately, our education system buys into what I call the Columbus mythology. For instance, in 6th century BC, Pythagoras, you've probably heard of Pythagoras. He opined that the earth was a globe. We don't know his reasons. We can only speculate because his writings don't survive. Parmenides in the 5th century BC definitely taught the earth was a globe. And I do congratulate the flat earthers on raising a good epistemological study. You may ask, well, what is epistemology? Well, it is the study or theory of the nature and grounds of knowledge, especially with reference to its limits and validity. Let me make that even simpler for you. Epistemology is how we know what we know. How we know what we know. You see, much of our education system is geared towards rote memorizations, names, dates, facts, figures, without assimilating and putting them together. At the university, I would teach astronomy classes, and early on in the year, I would talk about the history of astronomy, and I'd get to the Earth's shape, and I'd ask people, what shape do you think the Earth is? And they'd say, it's a globe. I've been out of the classroom for 8 years. Today, with the Flat Earth movement, I would probably get arguments and people on the other side. I'm glad I'm out of the classroom. But then I would ask, okay, tell me how you know the Earth is a globe. And usually I could not get one person to give me a good reason, not one. And so the flat earthers are right again. The flat earthers say we're being indoctrinated. Well, if you're being taught what to think, but not taught why or how to think that or why we think it's true, then yes, you have been indoctrinated. Of course, their solution is to indoctrinate you with something different entirely. And my education that I was teaching at the university, I tried to emphasize not so much what the right answers were, but how to get the right answers and to understand these things. And that's the hard part of this sort of thing. Well, here's a photograph of a total lunar eclipse I took in January of 2019. And this is about a 12, 13-second exposure taken with a Questar telescope, 1,300 millimeter focal length. I took some photographs of partial phases beforehand. Here is a photograph of that, one of those, but about a half hour before totality came. And we understand that the lunar eclipse is caused by the shadow of the Earth falling onto the moon. Now, flat earthers will object, well, that's not it at all. They try to give several reasons why they don't believe that. Well, the real reason why they don't believe that the shadow of the Earth falling on the moon is the reason for eclipses is because if that's the case, their theory is history. They can't admit that at all. So I won't spend time on why we know it's the Earth's shadow, but I want to ask you this question. Can you discern what the shape of the Earth's shadow is there? Can you see what it is? Here's another photograph I took about a half hour after totality. Can you see even better what shape the shadow is? Well, if you're really challenged on this, I can help you out even more. It's a circle. It's a circle. Now, the flat earthers suggest that the Earth is flat and round like this visual aid I have right here. And can a round, flat object like this or like a plate cast a circular shadow? Well, yes, it can. If the light is coming from the directions directly in front of me, then the shadow on the wall behind me will be a circle. But what would be if it's like this? That would coincide to an eclipse taking place at sunset, and it would not be a circular shadow. The thing is, every eclipse, and I've seen more than a dozen total lunar eclipses, and I've seen a number of other partial eclipses, every time, and I do mean every time, the shadow is circular. It has about the same size as well. And the only shape, regardless of orientation, that always casts a circular shadow is a circle, is a sphere. Aristotle thought the Earth was spherical. He wrote a book in 350 BC on the heavens where he just gave the argument I gave, but he also gave another one that's really good. He noticed that as you travel north and south, the angle the stars make with the horizon will change. For instance, here's a photograph that a friend of mine took at the Ark Encounter. If you've been to the Ark Encounter, you know exactly where that is. It's to the before you get to the Mzara's restaurant. And this is a half-hour exposure taken at night. You can see above the bow fin there's a single star. That's the Polaris, or the North Star, and all the stars seem to spin around it because it's very close to the center of the Earth's rotation axis there. It's not exactly the center, but it's close enough. The angle that it makes with the northern horizon is equal to your latitude. So where I live in northern Kentucky, it's 39 degrees. It's a little less than halfway up. I went to Edinburgh, Scotland a few years ago, and it was nearly 2/3 the way up. A few months after that, I went to South Florida. It wasn't even 1/3 of the way up. Now, when I went farther north, I was gaining stars up here in the northern horizon, but I was losing them in the southern horizon. And as I went down south to Florida, I was losing them in the north, but I was gaining them in the south. There were stars I was seeing there I could not see at home, let alone in Edinburgh. That only happens if you are moving on a curved surface. I'll explain this to you very quickly. Here is a plot. This is the representing the Earth, the green circle. There's a rotation axis of the Earth, and this line running horizontally is the Earth's equator. And so I can draw a line from the center of the Earth to a position, and that angle between that line and the equator is equal to your latitude, is it not? Now, this visible sky that you will see will be defined by the horizon that's tangent to the surface of the Earth there. I'll indicate that by a little dotted circle like that. Basically, every star to the upper right of that circle and every half the whole sky would be visible from there. Things to the lower left of that will not be visible because they will be below the horizon. So I can kind of draw in a little dome to represent that. Now I can draw in another line here. That line is parallel to the rotation axis of the Earth, and that would be the direction in space around which all the stars seem to spin. Polaris, or the North Star, would be located near that line on the dome there that I've drawn in. So I can draw a little line there running to the northern horizon, and look at the angle between those two lines I drew in, one to the northern horizon and one that is going to the parallel to the rotation axis. That angle is equal to your latitude. It's a nice little geometry proof. I can show it to you later if you'd like to see it, but it's a nice little exercise, but it is the same angle there. Now, notice that the angle it makes with the northern horizon there, how big the angle is. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you to Edinburgh, to a higher latitude, and look at the change. Y'all ready? There it is. You see the difference? The latitude is increased, and the angle that that point will make with the horizon also increases. For every 69 miles you travel northward, that angle increases by 1 degree. Every nautical mile, every 61 degree you go, 69 miles. If you go 60 nautical miles, it'll be a 1 degree change as well. Okay, another proof. This goes back to Pliny the Elder in the 1st century AD. He's noted that as ships move away from you, they disappear from their bottoms first. The hulls disappear first. Now, that's difficult to do without optical aid. I think he had to kind of do a gimme there on that one. But you do know, they even knew this in ancient times, people up on a mast of a ship see land before people on the deck of the ship would, because you're higher up and you can see around the curvature of the Earth a little bit more. Well, I tested this about 5 years ago. I happened to be in Virginia Beach, and I took a number of photographs of this cargo ship and another one. This is the NYK line. It's a major Japanese shipping firm. If you've seen their ships, I've seen them many times. Now, already this ship was moving out to sea, for leaving the port there at Virginia Beach, or in Newport News. It was the bottom of the letters of those lines were covered with something. It looks like water, and it looks like water between me and the ship, because I've seen their ships elsewhere, and those letters don't go completely down to the water line. A couple of reasons for that. Painting is an issue down that low, so they want visibility to be another one. So there's quite a distance there. Already part of this ship is occulted there. And then the ship got a little farther out, and I can tell it's a little farther out because everything's a lot smaller. You can see that superstructure there that's white, and you can see the containers are much smaller. It's turned a little bit as well. I'm also seeing a little of a inferior mirage showing up, and that's be important as we talk about this a little later on. And then later on, the ship turned its stern to me. It was heading out, I think, towards Europe. And then the last photograph I took here, the containers are completely gone. You're seeing a little bit of that inferior mirage showing up there. The people, flat earthers, try to argue about this, but the thing is, if you draw in where the actual horizon would be without that mirage, you still got a lot of the ship missing below that horizon. That horizon is actually, if there were no mirage taking place, the horizon would probably be right there. So there's a lot of ship missing on this particular little video. Well, 2 months ago, I did this again. I was in South Florida, and I'm going to show you in rapid succession 4 images of a ship that was approaching me, and instead of leaving, and you will see it come and it turns a little to the starboard, and as it does, progressively more of the ship will be visible. Ready? Here it goes. You see that? Let me go back and do that a second time for you. Okay, there it is. More, and more. And then I'll just put all 4 photographs up for you together so you can see them for yourself, like that. Again, there is something blocking it to start with, and less of it's blocking. Now, again, I've had arguments with flat earthers about this, what this means and what it comes about, but they're the ones who put forth the test. They said, look, if you see a ship departing or approaching you, and you progressively see less of it as it's moving away from you, blocked from the bottom, or more of it as you see more as it comes towards you, less blocked from the bottom, that would indicate the Earth is a globe. So when I show them that evidence, they say, well, that's not evidence the Earth is a globe at all. I'm saying, wait a minute, that's what the test was all about. You're the one that brought up the subject. Excuse me. All right. Now, Eratosthenes, you may have heard of him. Many people misunderstand what he did. He lived 2,200 years ago, around 200 BC, he measured the Earth's circumference. Many people on both sides of the issue think that he proved that the Earth is a globe. He did not. What he did is, knowing that the Earth is a globe, he measured its size. And flat earthers say, well, there, see, he's begging the question. He assumes something, blah, 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 blah. No, he was built. That's the way science works. You determine something and you build on that and build on that. That's what he was doing. People misunderstand this, sometimes intentionally, I think. Here's what happened. He lived in northern Egypt, in Alexandria, and he traveled down to southern Egypt, to modern-day Aswan. He noticed there that a deep well at noon on the June solstice, you could see the bottom of the well completely illuminated. If you've ever tried looking into a deep well, you cannot see the bottom because the Earth's rays never, unless you're in the tropics, they don't come in straight down. They come at an angle, and it's in darkness. So when he saw it, the bottom of the well illuminated at noon on the June solstice, he knew that the sun was directly overhead. Today, we would say it's on the northern edge of the tropic, what we call the Tropic of Cancer. Well, another year, he goes back up to Alexandria, and in the meantime, he designed and built a gnomon. People despairingly call it sticks in the sand. No, it's a bit more sophisticated than that, folks. It was a vertical pole engineered specifically to be vertical on a flat horizontal surface. And what he did is at noon on the June solstice, he measured the length of the shadow. Now, when you do that, you have a right triangle. You have a vertical pole making 90 degrees with the horizontal, therefore it's a right angle there. You measure the length of the shadow, you know the height. A simple trigonometry, you can measure this angle at the other end, the angle, how far the sun is from the vertical. He found it to be 1/50th of a circle. He expressed it not in degrees, but as an angle, as a fraction of entire circle, about 7.2 degrees. So he said, if you look at the diagram there between Alexandria and Aswan, you would say that you can see that if you continue that line on down, it's a difference in latitude between the two positions. And so if you know the linear distance between those 2 points, if you multiply by 50, that will tell you the circumference of the Earth. You divide by 2 pi, you have the radius. Well, did he know the distance between those two cities? You bet he did. Eratosthenes is known as the father of geography. He coined the term, and he commissioned surveying and map making in Egypt, and he knew the distance pretty well. And he got a distance, we don't know what units he used. He used a unit called the stadium, but there are a couple different stadia being used. If he used the more common stadium, he was off by about 20% from the correct value. But if he used the less commonly used one, his answer was within 0.5% of the correct value. Are you all impressed by this? 200 BC. Yeah, I used to tell my students, and every time I talk about this, I said, are you impressed? If your hand doesn't go up, then you haven't paid attention. This is impressive. Now, flat earthers will say, well, wait a minute, you can also interpret this result in terms of the earth being flat. If the sun's just a few thousand miles above the earth, a flat earth going around, then it will cast different length of shadows, and they're absolutely correct. So what you can do is you can take Eratosthenes' experiment and you can then calculate how high the sun is above the Earth's surface. Flat earthers don't bother doing that, unfortunately. They just simply point out it could be interpreted in terms of flat earth. Well, why don't you go ahead and do it? Well, the thing is, I've done the Eratosthenes experiment a number of times. Different times, different places, different dates. And whenever I do it and I calculate the results, when I interpret it in terms of the Earth's being a sphere, I get consistent results. I get a circumference of about 25,000 miles, give or take 1.5%, something like this, every time I do it. And this did it again last week. But when I interpret it in terms of the Earth being flat, one time I get 2,300 miles for the height of the sun. Another time I get 3,800 miles, I believe. I get 40, 50% differences between the two. So while the Eratosthenes experiment by itself, done once, will not tell you the Earth's shape, if you repeat it on different dates and different locations, it does. It gives both models make predictions, and the way science works is you test your predictions. I've tested the globe model. It works out famously with this. I get 1.5% error max. Last time I did it, I got 0.25% error, by the way, from the book value. But if you do it with a flat Earth, you get results that are all over the place. The sun's distance is continually changing, and that's not the way it works. So when you apply real science here that they like to talk about, the flat earthers, it flunks miserably on this front. Okay, so how did this flat earth myth arise? Well, a couple of things happened. In the 19th century, there were three developments. One was archaeology as we know it developed. The British developed that. They went to Mesopotamia and Egypt, and they began excavating all over the place. Archaeology did not exist as we know it until then. And when they did, they discovered what they called the cosmology of the ancient Near East. And one of our speakers yesterday dealt with this. And what their cosmology was a round, flat disc like this with a dome over top of it. They said, aha, this is the cosmology of the ancient Near East. And I put that in quotes, and I would put that in air quotes if I had a free hand. The reason why I do that is because what they discovered was a ancient Near Eastern cosmology. They didn't discover the ancient Near Eastern cosmology. And they simply interpreted everything in terms of that. Since then, they've discovered, not long after that, they actually discovered other ancient Near Eastern cosmologies. Then the documentary hypothesis came about. This is the belief that Moses, if he existed at all, which he did, but they doubt that he did, but if he did exist, the Pentateuch was not written until 1,000 years later, about the time of the Babylonian captivity. They picked up the Gilgamesh epic with the flood and the creation myths of the Mesopotamians, along with their domed flat Earth cosmology. Folks, this is nothing less than a direct assault upon the authority and inspiration of Scripture. And yet, flat Earthers who claim to believe the Bible and hold it in high esteem don't recognize this. And this is the kind of cosmology. Again, last night, one of our speakers showed this. It was Doug Smith who showed a similar drawing to this, flat with a dome over top, and he gave several criticisms even then. If you want to see, go back and review those. And then finally, there was a conflict thesis that was developed. The conflict thesis is the idea that religion, that is Christianity, and science and progress have always been at loggerheads, and that was a very popular theme in the 19th century, and this got folded into this as well. So that's how the Columbus myth came about. Washington Irving played a role in that. I don't have time to talk about it. There are depictions in the Middle Ages that suggest that people thought the earth was a globe. This is a depiction from a Bible of the creation, day 2. It's on, we know this Bible dates from around 1350 AD, a century and a half before Columbus's voyage. And you can see the waters above, and you can see the rakia above, between the waters and the earth, and look at the shape of the earth. Is it flat? It looks like a globe to me. And you find this consistently throughout the Middle Ages. This myth that everybody in the Middle Ages thought the earth was flat is just that. It's a myth. They knew it was a globe. So how did this modern movement get started? It started with Samuel Rowbotham, an Englishman of the 19th century, died around 1880s, and he performed what's called the Bedford Level experiment. The Bedford Level is this drainage canal and river in eastern England. It runs for 6 miles pretty much straight, and it's down near the coast, and there's no vertical relief. and so the water just kind of sits there. It doesn't have any pitch to it. There's virtually no current to speak of. There's a small current, but not much at all. And so what he did is he got somebody in a rowboat, and he had them row away from him over the 6-mile course. Now, you'll see over here in the diagram, this is from his book, by the way, Samuel Rowbotham's book. He's stationed over here at point A, and he's in the water, he's got his waders on, and he's got a tripod, and he's got a telescope that's 8 inches above the water. Now, why did he pick that 8-inch height? Well, as it turns out, if you run the math, you will find that if you're 8 inches above the surface of the water, then your tangent from you to the surface, to the edge of the earth, that is defining your geometrical horizon, will be 1 mile away. So if this person's departing down the drainage canal, by the time he gets 1 mile away, the bottom of the boat will start to be blocked out, and the farther he goes, the more it will be blocked out. And so when he gets the additional 5 miles, that is a total 6 miles away from his position, the total amount of curvature will amount to something like 18 or 20 feet. He had a mast with a flag on the boat that went up like 6 feet. So after going the entire 6-mile course, through his telescope, he should not see the boat at all. But he did. See, I said before, when I show the pictures of my boat there, and they say, well, wait a minute, this doesn't prove curvature. I'm saying, well, wait a minute. That was Rowbotham's initial point. He said, if the boat disappears whole first as it sails away from me, or rows away from me, then the earth is a globe. But the fact is, he saw it the whole way, indicates that the earth must be flat, he said. You can't have it both ways, folks. Now, contrast that with my pictures. He reported that the boat remained visible the entire way. I showed you pictures of how the boats, 2 of them, disappeared. Who is right? Well, actually, we're both kind of right. You see, he didn't consider atmospheric refraction caused by a temperature inversion. What is a temperature inversion? Okay, from grade school science, you know the temperature of the air generally is warmest at the surface, and as you increase in altitude, the temperature decreases. But if you're sitting over a body of cold water, and it's a warm or a spring or summer day, the water will almost always be cooler than the air above it. So you can chill that layer of air right there, and that air is cooler than the air above it, and then above that, the temperature starts to decrease again. You see the inversion I'm talking about. Certain places that happens quite frequently, particularly in warm spring and summer days, which is coincidentally when people want to go to the beach. I'm careful not to go to the beach and do this on days that I'm doing this. And so if you start with a beam of light heading off like this, it would go like this and go on up higher into the atmosphere. The problem is it starts off in that cooler region of air, several degrees cooler, and the speed of light depends upon the temperature of the air. If the air is cooler, it's going to be a different speed. And as it does this, it will be, as it starts to move tangentially to the Earth's surface, to move upward in elevation, it will cause it to move in a region of warmer air. And as that happens, it will cause refraction to take place. We understand refraction or bending of light very well. It's when you try to change, going from a medium of one density to, or I should say, speed of light or index refraction into another one. And as you're trying to go to that warmer air above, it's going to refract the light back into that cooler air, and this can go on for miles. This is a very well understood and very well documented reality. And so he happened to be there on a day when there's a temperature inversion, and the light bent around the edge of the Earth, and it went for miles and miles. It's a very stable situation. They like to talk about this modern example. Joshua Nowicki is a very fine photographer. If you look carefully, you may recognize the skyline of Chicago. There's the Willis Tower, formerly the Sears Tower there. Very beautiful skyline, isn't it? The problem is it's taken from Grand Mere State Park, which is in southwestern Michigan. You're looking across Lake Michigan over 50 miles. And in 50 miles of curvature, the curvature should be about 2,000 feet, which would be about up here. The horizon should be there, and you shouldn't see anything. Now, it's very important to note that Joshua Nowicki is not, repeat, not a flat earther. He is a very good photographer. He understands physics, and he knows when to go out to take a photograph like this. Is this a provocative photograph? You're seeing something you shouldn't be able to see. I didn't say it's impossible. It's simply saying difficult to see or you shouldn't be able to see. It requires extremely clear weather and also requires the temperature inversion conditions. And he knows when to do this and when not. If he took a photograph and all he saw was just the horizon with no city, that wouldn't be very interesting, would it? So this is a very provocative photograph only because it's showing you something that you think shouldn't. By the way, he takes some of his photos and puts them together in a time lapse, and this thing bobs up and down. The city bobs up and down. You don't see down to street level because the refraction isn't as complete as you might think. Flat Earth, you would see the street level. And again, you contrast it with one of my photos. Again, I did my photos when there was no temperature inversion. These people do it when they do. I have to think that some of the flat earthers that make these kind of videos, these kind of pictures, have done this again and again and again, and they just simply show us the results they want to show us. Here's another modern famous example. They call this the black swan because it's you see something unexpected. They say here that this is off the coast of Southern California. You got two oil platforms there, 6.21 miles and 9.41. But from the position just a few feet above the level of the water, the bottoms of both of those should be blocked off. The horizon should lie, the geometrical horizon should lie between you and those platforms. The fact that it lies beyond very clearly, that proves that the Earth is flat. This started circulating about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. So I said, okay, where did this come from? Well, it was done by a flat earther, and I went to watch his video, and he said most days this is what he sees. Exactly what you would expect to see if the Earth is a globe. He said, though occasionally, in fact, let me just give you a screenshot. Most days, normal visibility of platforms and boats will appear they are behind the horizon, curvature of the Earth. That's what he said about that last photograph I just put up there. Then he says, once in a while, not very often, there will be days when conditions are right to see full image. That is the first one I showed you. What's he just admitted to here? Cherry-picking data. He's just admitted I'd taken a bunch of photographs, and most of them, almost all of them, show the Earth as a globe, but I'm going to show you the one photograph that shows the Earth is flat, and that proves the Earth is flat. And flat earthers find this convincing. They find this convincing. Well, Rowbotham started this movement. It was born in the 19th century through a couple of books he wrote in his influence. It rapidly spread and kind of began to die out by the early 20th century. There were several flat earth societies that started up over the years and collapsed, and most of them were tongue-in-cheek, or some of them were. And it was revived about 6 years ago, mostly through the internet and YouTube. So you got these certified flat earth YouTube scientists. And it's a broad range of theological beliefs involved. Some are New Agers, some are Muslims, some are Buddhist, some claim to be Christian. They believe the Bible, supposedly. Well, I want to deal with just a few of the supposed biblical arguments for flat earth here. I won't have a lot of time to do this. There's so many they try to use, but I will do that. First of all, they say the rakia of day 2 proves that the earth is flat. The purpose was to separate waters above and waters below, and the luminaries were placed there on day 4. And this is often translated firmament, and this firmament is supposed to be this solid dome above the earth. And however, it really, as mentioned last night, the word should be properly translated as expanse. That's a very basic part of his misunderstanding, and Doug Smith's talk last night touched upon this. And they point out this proves the earth is flat because earth was made before the sun. Yeah, how that proves the earth is flat is a mystery to me too. All right. They say if the Bible teaches the earth is flat, then I would ask the question, then shouldn't somewhere there be a verse that reads something like the earth is flat? And there is no such verse. Instead, what they do is they tend to read certain Bible verses like the earth being made before the sun to mean the earth is flat, and then they interpret that back again, which is a bizarre way of doing this. They also make a point that they say, you folks, you claim to believe the Bible is literally true, but if you really believe what the Bible says, it literally says the earth is flat. Well, again, there's no passage that says that. It's your understanding that says that, but I'm scratching my head trying to figure out how you got that. But more to the point, is everything in the Bible literally true? Or assume I say, is everything in the Bible literal? Put it that way. And the answer is, well, no, they're figures of speech. There are idioms being used. There are similes. Jesus told a lot of similes. The kingdom of heaven is like. Those are the Beatitudes. I mean, the parables that he told. There are many metaphors. Jesus told metaphors. He was the bread of life. He was the light of the world. He was the living water. He was the door. He was the good shepherd. He was the vine. And then he started talking about the branches being the disciples. And then he started talking about pruning them. I think they understood that that was not to be taken also literally. Many of the passages they use come from the poetic and prophetic books in the Bible, and they are filled with symbolic and allegorical themes. However, those things, the symbolism and allegorical themes, are largely missing from historical narrative. Historical narrative is pretty clear to identify, and those themes are generally not found in those. I think some people are fearful, saying, well, wait a minute, once you agree that there's a few things non-literal in the Bible, then the door is open for non-literal days and non-literal this and non-literal that. Well, no, it's very simple. You're going to take some non-literal usages in the poetic and prophetic passages and then insist that you can run free rein through historical narrative. That's not the way it works, folks. You have to deal with the genre that's there. And it's historical narrative. It's not telling you a bunch of non-literal usages. Otherwise, the historical narrative is completely useless at that point. They also like to use Isaiah 40:22. It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to dwell in. They say, see, he used the word circle there. If he went to use the word globe of the earth, he would have, but he didn't. He used the word circle, so therefore that's what the earth looks like. You've got there it's a certain type of projection we use. You put the North Pole at the middle. You've got as you go farther and farther out, you get those lines of latitude, which are circles of latitude. And it does a pretty good job of showing the northern hemisphere. Once you get down to the equator and a bit farther south, it gets a little tricky. For instance, you'll notice that South America and Africa are both stretched east-west. Look at Australia. It's really stretched east-west because of the distortions involved. There is no South Pole, by the way. Instead, there's an ice wall called Antarctica that surrounds the Earth like that, and that's what keeps the water from falling off the Earth. Now, some flat earthers object to the cover of my book. You've probably seen it down at the book table. It's got water coming off the edge or ice or something. They say, well, and some of them actually told me, several of them, I'm not going to read your book because the cover is a incorrect depiction. It's a straw man argument. They've never heard the adage, you can't judge a cover by its book, apparently. The cover was meant to be provocative. But you know what, folks? If you believe the earth is flat, if you start reading my book, you'll find out I didn't write it for you. I really didn't write it for flat earthers. So if they don't want to read it, that's fine with me. They're not my intended audience anyway. Now, oh, by the way, the word there, circle of the earth, I've talked to some Hebrew people, and I know some Hebrew people, and they tell me the word used there means round thing. Yeah, is this round? Yes. Is a basketball round? Yes. If you ask most people what the shape of the earth is, what are they going to tell you? It's round. And the flat earthers will say, of course it's round, but is it round like a basketball or round like this? You see, we do the same thing in English. We got a round word, and we use that interchangeably with flat round things and three-dimensional round things. They say elsewhere in the book of Isaiah, there is a passage that says, God's talking to Israel and says, I will toss you like a ball into the court like that. And they say, see, there's a Hebrew word that could mean ball. Isaiah didn't use it, so therefore, slam dunk, the earth must be a circle. This other word must mean circle, except for one problem. That word they say means ball and nothing else. It's used one other time in the book of Isaiah, and guess what it means there? Something round. Something two-dimensional round, not three-dimensional round. So it's not even consistent. Both words, I think, mean something round is the whole point. All right. Does the earth have four corners? Isaiah 11:12 says, he will raise a signal for the nations and will assemble the banished of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Revelation 7:1, after this I saw four angels standing at the four corners of the earth, holding back the four winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on earth or sea or against any tree. Slam dunk. You can't have, they point to the globe and they say, show me on a globe where you can have four corners. Slam dunk, the earth must be flat and must not be a globe. I cannot believe they make that argument and use that verse, those two verses. It's amazing, isn't it? And not all flat earthers make that argument, I will grant you, but a number of them do. And I'm just scratching my head thinking, really? Have you looked at your model lately? Where are the corners on that one? So which is it? Is the Earth round or like a disc, like a plate, or is it square like a checkerboard? Well, Orlando Ferguson back in the 1890s kind of split the difference, didn't he? He has the four angels on the four corners there, and you've got four corners, and then inside of that's a circular Earth. I call this the roulette wheel model because it looks like a roulette wheel to me that he has there. By the way, sometimes people ask me, well, what is this thing about four corners and all this kind of stuff? Well, in Revelation, it mentioned there, the 7:1, it says four corners, four winds, four angels. I think it's talking about the four cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. And we still use that today. If you look at a detailed weather forecast, it'll give you information such as the wind is out of the southwest at a certain speed. What about the term ends of the earth? It occurs 28 times. For instance, Psalm 67:7, God shall bless us. Let all the ends of the earth fear him. And Isaiah 45:22, turn to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God and there is no other. Aha, on a globe, unlike the four corners, on a globe, you don't have edges. You go round and around and around. You never reach the end of the earth, but you do have an end on this depiction. So therefore, slam dunk, the Bible teaches the earth is flat. Except there's one problem. If you're going to take this that literally, notice it's causing the ends of the earth to fear him, and they're calling the ends of the earth to be saved. I'm sorry, but real estate can't be saved, and geography cannot fear God. It's talking about people. This is an idiomatic expression. It refers to people living at the remotest portions of the earth. There's another one I get amused by, the tree of Daniel 4. In Daniel 4, there is it talks here, it says, the tree grew and became strong, and its top reached to heaven, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth. They say on a globe, if you had a big tree grow up very, very high, no matter how high it got, only half of the earth at best could actually see the tree. The other half could not. But if the earth is flat, like a disc, you could grow a tree tall enough that people everywhere else in the world could see that tree. Slam dunk, the Bible teaches the earth is flat. Okay, let's examine this. In 4:10, by the way, the whole chapter, we need to look at it in context. It's a whole one account that happened in the life of Daniel. And it says, the visions of my head as I lay in my bed were these. I saw and behold a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. Point number one, it was a dream. And we're told like 10 times, it was a dream, it was a dream, it was a dream. And Daniel was called to interpret the dream. Are your dreams, well, your dreams like mine? My dreams are incredibly surrealistic. Unbelievable. I had one last night that was just weird. I won't tell you what it was, but it made no sense. That happens all the time in my dreams, and I think that's pretty universal. It was a dream. It was not reality. It was also the dream of a pagan king, Nebuchadnezzar, and it also, the interpretation of the dream was given, and Nebuchadnezzar, well, the tree represented him. So first of all, you got a tree in a dream, which of course means it's not true, but the tree isn't really a tree. The tree represents Nebuchadnezzar. You got that? We're getting several steps removed from reality at this point. And there's no indication, by the way, the dream was fulfilled. It was fulfilled if you read the chapter. And there's no evidence that this is actually teaching cosmology, nor does it necessarily reflect the cosmology of Nebuchadnezzar. Suppose tonight, I wish this would happen sometime, but it hasn't happened yet. Suppose tonight I had a dream that the earth was flat. Would that make me a flat earther? No, of course not. It just meant I had a dream that the earth was flat. So just because, even if Nebuchadnezzar had this dream and understood that the earth was flat from this dream, it doesn't mean that he believed the earth was flat. He may have, he may not have, we don't know. Again, this is what their model looks like. It's flat and round, North Pole at the middle, and you've got the stars on the dome and the sun and the moon. They spin around once a day like this. How then do you get day and night? Because if you look there, no matter where you are on the earth, you can see the sun, can't you? So it should be daylight. Well, the answer is that the sun's sort of like a spotlight. It shines down on a portion of the earth, and as it goes around, you alternately are in that daylight and not in it. And this is one of their own little depictions of how that ought to work. That little white disk in the dark portion, that is the moon. Now, obviously, as it's going around, is the distance of the sun changing throughout the day? Yeah, it's getting closer to me, it's getting farther away, it's getting closer, it's getting farther away. So throughout the day, if something gets closer to you and it gets farther away, what happens to its apparent size? It changes, doesn't it? So I tested this a few years ago, and I'll quickly go through the details here. I'll just tell you what I did. I looked at the sun early in the morning, and I used a telescope, put a solar filter on it, took the same camera setup and telescope I used to take those boat pictures, ship pictures. And what I did is I took it early in the morning when it was right around sunrise, when it got above the trees, I'll put it that way. And the sun was only 8 degrees above the horizon, astronomical horizon, whatever you want to call it. The problem was I had trees, I couldn't get any closer. And then again at local noon, it made an angle of 63 degrees to the horizontal. So I did some calculations following basic trigonometry and determined that at local noon, the sun should be 6.4 times larger. So here's my photo early in the morning. It's kind of dull red because I wanted to keep everything else the same. The ISO setting and exposure times are all the same. The only thing that was different was when I took the photograph, and you see a little bit of a tree branch in the lower right there, and here it is at local noon, and sure enough, it's 6.4 times larger, isn't it? Again, another test that fails miserably. I printed these out on pieces of paper, and I measured legal size, and I measured them, and to my ability to measure them, they were the same size. Again, prediction tested, prediction of the flat earth fails. They make all sorts of false claims. I've heard many flat earthers argue the North Star is visible well into the southern hemisphere. That is false. I've been to the southern hemisphere 10 times. I've never seen it down there. A circular pattern of stars throughout the night can happen only on a flat earth. Remember those pictures I showed you in the beginning with above the arc, those circular patterns? They say that only can happen if the earth is flat. It can't happen on a globe earth. Well, let's talk about that for a second. Let's suppose that they're all spinning around that spot up the top of the dome there, and I've got a line pointing down to Australia. It can be anywhere we want it to be on the globe there, on the flat plane, excuse me. And it's going to spin around this axis right there through the North Pole. So a star that's not on that axis is going to spin like that. So what I have there is a vertical circle of motion like that, right? Now, as you look at it, does it look like a circle? No. The only time it's going to look like a circle is if you're looking at it on axis. That is if you're at the North Pole of the Earth. We're not at the North Pole of the Earth. Nobody is. So what you should see is something like this. Now, I simulated this in the planetarium. I went in the planetarium. I had them spin the stars around the point directly overhead. I got my camera up as high as I could get it out near the edge, pointing at it, and this is what I did in 30 seconds. Do you see the circular pattern? No, there's a series of concentric elliptical patterns, aren't there? That's what the prediction is if the Earth is flat. This is what you get when you actually make the observation. I took this photograph in Arizona, half-hour exposure. Are they ellipses? No, they are circular. I did this time lapse above my house. You can see the North Star there at the above the point of the house. You can see the Big Dipper over here. This is about an hour's worth of exposures, a time lapse showing them spinning in a counterclockwise pattern as I look towards the north. Now, if I turn towards the south, they have a different approach. They have a different thing. In fact, I took this in the southern hemisphere, and I'm looking towards the south, and the stars there are spinning around a point to the lower right above the trees, and you'll notice that there is no south star, but they are spinning around. Which direction are they going? They're going clockwise because I'm spun around, I'm looking the other direction. You see, there's not one point, but 2 points in the sky around which the stars will spin. That can only happen on a globe Earth. It can't happen on a flat Earth with a dome over top because there's only one axis, not two. Again, the flat Earth fails to explain this. Okay, in order to believe that the Earth is flat, you have to believe that there have been all sorts of conspiracies put forth for centuries, trying to lie to us about the Earth's shape. It's a huge conspiracy, bigger than any conspiracy you've ever heard of, so it's a mother lode of all of these things. Who's behind it? Well, it could be the Freemasons. They're always the whipping boys, it seems like, and it could be the Jesuits. They're always out there being blamed for stuff, and it could be the Jews. Some people combine two or even all three of those together, and I have noticed that there is a very strong anti-Semitic thread running through flat Earth. There's a guy named Edward Hendry. He's written 2 books. The first book, I'm going to quote some from here. The second book, he actually took me on in a few places, and his refutation of my arguments are laughable. They really are. But here are some of the quotes from, he wrote a book called The Greatest Lie on Earth, Proof That Our World is Not a Moving Globe. And this is what he said. Communism is essentially Talmudic Judaism. Do not think that Jews are ignorant of the fact that Satan is the god of their religion. This evil doctrine can also be seen in the Talmud, where incest, fornication, adultery, etc. are promoted as virtues and something to be desired. And then the ritual sacrifice of Gentile children by Jews has led to repeated banishment of Jews from one nation after another throughout history. This goes on for 150 pages in that book. It's difficult for a sensible person to read this. I went out on some social media that I belong to. It's a Facebook discussion group with flat earthers, and I gave a big long list, these and others, and I said, does anybody care to condemn this? No response. Please, somebody condemn this. No response. I went on for days. I begged, I pleaded, I cajoled. I said, look, finally I said, look, and they defended it. Several of them defended it. And I said, look, if you do not condemn this, then I must assume that you agree with it. And nobody argued with me. And I was shocked. I was stunned. I mean, I'm always amazed by the things that I say flat earthers saying and believing. This is shocking to me, folks, and I still can't believe it, but it is. Well, look, if the earth is flat, nothing can orbit the earth. You can't get through the dome. If nothing can orbit the earth, that means the moon doesn't orbit the earth either. We're completely wrong about astronomy, and they do say that frequently. They think they treat me and other astronomers as complete, absolute fools. We don't know what we're talking about. And then there are no satellites, and there are no astronauts. There are hundreds of astronauts. They're all astronauts, you see, N-O-T-S. They're all liars. They're all Freemasons, by the way, even the ones that aren't. And so it goes. We haven't been to the moon, so then I've heard about the moon the landing conspiracy. Well, this is just a small part of the much bigger motherlode conspiracy, or mothership conspiracy. And except there have been at least 2 Christians that have walked on the moon. So a few years ago, I contacted Charlie Duke. I met him a few times. I knew his identical twin brother, and I worked with his niece for a number of years at the university. I said, can you give me a quote? And he said, sure. He wrote this. He said, I was the lunar module pilot on the Apollo 16 mission to the moon. We launched from the Kennedy Space Center in April '72. We left the Earth orbit for a 3-day trip to the moon about 3 hours later. As we maneuvered our spacecraft to dock with our lunar module, the Earth came into view about 20,000 miles away. It was an awesome sight. As you can see in the photo, the Earth is obviously a sphere and not a flat circle. As we journeyed to the moon, we would look out our windows and see a smaller Earth, and each time we would see different land masses, so it obviously was rotating on its axis. One of the biggest things that happened to this man, complete fabrication, complete lie, if the flat earthers have their way. Flat earthers are like that. They have decided what's true, and almost everything that's out there is not true, and it's all false. They are the few chosen people who have figured it all out. And one day you might be enlightened like they are. This is Gnosticism, folks. It's an allure, the attraction of secret hidden knowledge. There's a belief then that the more widely something is believed, the less likely it is to be true. And this has also led many flat earthers, and I'm investigating this recently. They're following all sorts of heretical teachings, like non-Trinitarianism, God has a body, and all these sorts of things, because it's not generally believed. They believe these things because they're not believed widely. Jeff Williams, I hope to meet him next week. He's coming to town. I hope I can get there and meet him. He wrote a book. He's an astronaut, spent a lot of time aboard the ISS, took a lot of photos. He did a photo book called The Work of His Hands. I'm going to get my copy autographed, I hope. And here's one of the pictures. Obviously, the Earth is a globe. I've met a few other astronauts, and they tell me, yeah, the Earth is definitely a globe. So what is the motivation of flat earthers? Some of them are undoubtedly well-intentioned. They really are sincere, but they're sincerely wrong. Others are just doing this as a prank. Some of them are actually making money off the internet on this, and that's truly wicked. Some are malicious, attempting to make Christians look foolish and discredit the Bible, and that is doubly wicked at that point. That is why, folks, why I oppose this, why I fight this, because it's a perversion of Scripture, it's a perversion of Christianity, it's a perversion of what God teaches us, and it's a threat to creation ministries, because some of their arguments have been lifted from us in part or in toto, and I want to make some distinction between us, because they are abusing these things, not using them properly. And I've collected a lot more material than I could possibly share in 45 minutes. I have this book, Falling Flat. It's exhaustive discussion, but there's a lot more I could add. I published it a year and a half ago, and I've got more material I could add, but I probably won't publish that except online in different places. We also have a DVD called Faith on the Edge. I didn't bring those with me. That's my book, but that is a DVD put out by the Creation Guys, and I'm in there as well, where we discuss the flat Earth. But thank you very much for coming today.